existed. Today we'll be discussing the halachic issues of forgetting Torah. The issue in general, the prohibition of forgetting Torah, and then we're going to go through some of the more specific, some of the more obscure, some of the more common known things that the Gemara says you're not supposed to do because it'll cause you to forget your learning, to forget Torah. We'll go through each one. Some of them I think people have heard of. I'll try to pick the more common ones and not the more obscure ones to try to clarify the halachas because it's a little more relevant. Before we begin, as always, it should not be relied upon for halachic psak, and a rab should be consulted. Also, the learning that we do today should be a schus for all the Jews in Eretz Yisrael as a protection, and especially the soldiers who are in harm's way. That Hakadosh Baruch Hu should protect them. That they shouldn't have any more pain, any more tsar, and there should just be shalom in Eretz Yisrael and in Klal Yisrael. So, to begin this sugya, we have to look at a Gemara in Menachos. The Gemara Menachos in Daf Tzadi Tesamid Beis says the following: Rish Lakish teaches, Kol Meshakeach Davrecha Mitalmudai, any Jew who forgets a word of Torah over Balav, you've transgressed a negative commandment. It is biblically prohibited to forget Torah. Shneimar Hishamer Lach Ushmar Nafshecha Ma'od. The pasuk says you should be very careful and watch yourself. Pentishkach Advarim. That you should not forget my words, Hashem says. Hashem tells Klal Yisrael that you have to be very careful not to forget my Torah. And therefore, if a Jew who learned, let's say, a page of Gemara, and he forgets that page of Gemara, he actually has transgressed the prohibition. That the Gemara the Gemara continues. I would maybe, is it possible that you'll also be punished, that you also have transgressed the prohibition if it was against your will, meaning that you couldn't review the Torah because it was too complicated, it was too much, you ran out of time? Tamal Marak, meaning it is only prohibited to forget Torah if you actively, passively, whatever it is, you're not interested in reviewing it anymore. You learned a page of Gemara. I don't care about that page of Gemara anymore. I don't want to review that page of Gemara. That's when you have transgressed the prohibition. But if someone wants to review, but it's just so difficult, I'm running out of time, I don't have enough time to review everything that I learned, which is on most people, then it's not a prohibition. It's like an ones. Hashem understands. Really, this halacha is a Mishnah in Avos. The Mishnah in Avos, Paragimel Mishnah Ches, says Rav Dostoi ben Rav Yanai, Mishum Rav Meir Omer, Rav Meir used to say, Kol hashakeach davrecha mimishnaso, any Jew who forgets a teaching of Torah, Malav HaKosov Kil Mischai B'nafsho. Hashem says it's as if you're giving up your own life, because what you've done is a very, very big sin. As the pasuk says, we said before, Hashem says you have to be careful and watch, make sure that you guard my Torah. Is it possible that you'll also be punished if you didn't review the Torah because you just didn't have time, it was too much work? You didn't have time to review. It's not like you did it on purpose. You'll only have transgressed, you're only doing something wrong if you actively do not review your learning because you're not interested in reviewing your learning. That's when it's a problem. But if you don't review your learning because you ran out of time, then Hakadosh Baruch Hu understands. And this halacha is brought down in the Shulchan Aruch Harav in Hilchos Talmud Torah, Perek Beis, Halacha Daled. So before we get into our big discussion, I want to focus on one small nakuda, which I think is very important. The Shulchan Aruch Harav also says this halacha, that if a person does not review his Torah and he forgets what he learned, he's going to be punished. It's a prohibition, it's a transgression. And the Shulchan Aruch Harav adds, he says over here, V'gam achshav, even today, this is in Hilchos Talmud Torah, Perek Beis, Halacha Daled, even today, shenichtav Torah shel Baal Peh, where the Gemara is written down, and even if you forget your learning, you could still check it up. It doesn't matter. Once the second that you forget what Gemara you learned, the fact that you can check it up doesn't make a difference because you've already it's over. You already forgot. So I want to explain what this means because I think it's a very important nekuda. We know that historically, we know that the Torah is split up into two parts. There's the written Torah and the oral Torah. The written Torah is Chumash, Tanakh, Torah, Nevi'im, Ksuvim, and they were always written down. On the contrary, you're not allowed to learn it by heart. It has to be written down. But then there's a second portion of Torah, and that's Torah Shbal Peh, which is the oral Torah, which is Gemara, Mishnayos, Medrash, all these things. And the oral Torah was oral. It wasn't written down. On the contrary, you were not allowed to write it down. The Gemara tells us that there was a time in Klal Yisrael, thousands of years ago, when the Jews were not able. So how was oral Torah taught? It was taught orally from Rebbe to student. Nothing was written down. You write down your notes, but there was no Gemara, so you couldn't go to a Sfarim store and buy Gemara. There was no Mishnayos in the Sfarim store. Your Rebbe would teach you, and you would teach your students, and that's how it was done. Now, obviously, this is very difficult, because if something wasn't written down, it was very easy to forget it. And eventually the Gemara says, Eis lasas la'Hashem efer Torasecha. They decided that it's worthwhile to write down the oral Torah. That way everyone can have it, have access for everyone. So that's the Gemara. That's when the Gemara was written down, and that's the Gemara that we have today. So says the Shulchan Aruch Harav, this halacha that you're not allowed to forget Torah doesn't matter whether it's written Torah, oral Torah, and it doesn't matter the fact that I can check it up in the store. Meaning, one might argue, let's say I learned a pasuk, Bereshis bara Elokim es hashamayim v'ha'aretz. I learned that first pasuk, and then I forgot it. According to the Shulchan Aruch Harav, it was an avera. I did an avera. I wasn't allowed to forget it. But I understand, what does it mean I forgot it? Just check it up again. It's in the Chumash. It's not like it's gone. It's not like it's a teaching that only I knew. It's a pasuk in Chumash, so go check it up. So it says the Shulchan Aruch Harav, it doesn't matter that it's a pasuk in the Torah. You're not allowed to forget your personal Torah. It's a personal prohibition. It's a prohibition on the person, that the person is not allowed to forget Torah. And therefore, if you forgot a piece of Torah, even though that it's written down in a sefer, that shouldn't make a difference. You're not allowed to go. You're not allowed to do that. And if you forgot it, that's a problem. So I saw a very interesting teaching in the sefer Keser Rosh. The Keser Rosh is Brisker Rav. It's teachings of Rav Chaim Volozhiner. So that Rav Chaim Volozhiner says in Ois Samach Zayin, Be'inyan shokech davar echad mimishnasa, this prohibition of forgetting Torah, Zakayal Rishonim Shalom du Bapeh, this doesn't apply anymore. This whole prohibition of forgetting Torah only applied when the oral Torah was oral and it wasn't written. But nowadays that you're able to check everything up, how could you say you forgot Torah? It's not forgotten, it's in the Sefer. And the Brisker Rav also talks about this in Ala Torah, Parshas Veschanon. Let me explain the machlokas. According to the Rav Chaim Volozhiner and the Brisker Rav, potentially, when the Torah says don't forget Torah, it's not a personal avera. It's not an avera on the person. It's not talking about the person forgetting Torah. It's that each person is required and obligated to ensure that the Torah is not forgotten. The Torah itself is not forgotten. The Torah is so precious that it deserves to not be forgotten. Therefore, says Rav Chaim Volozhiner, nowadays that the Torah is written down, even if you as an individual forget a teaching, the Torah is not forgotten because the Torah is in the Sfarim store, the Torah is in the books. This whole prohibition doesn't apply anymore. According to Rav Chaim Volozhiner, the only time this prohibition existed was when the Torah was oral and it wasn't written down. Therefore, if you forgot the teaching, there was no Mishnayos. Therefore, the first Mishnah in Brachos, it wasn't written down. It wasn't written down anywhere in the world. Each Jew just held onto it in his memory. Therefore, if you forget that teaching, it's possible that the Mishnah in Brachos will be forever forgotten. That's why it was a prohibition. It's not an individual prohibition, meaning, obviously, if you do it, it's a prohibition on the person, but it's not like the Torah says, Avi Zagadinsky, remember what you learned. The Torah doesn't care what Avi Zagadinsky remembers or not. It's the Torah wants every Mishnah to be remembered. And therefore I had to remember it in order to ensure that it'll be remembered. But nowadays where everything's written down, the whole prohibition doesn't apply. Okay. And the Shulchan Aruch Harav obviously disagrees. The Shulchan Aruch Harav feels that the prohibition applies today, and therefore it's not about forgetting the Torah or remembering the Torah, it's a personal thing. A person's not allowed to forget what he learns. I think la halacha, most authorities assume, like the Shulchan Aruch Harav, that the prohibition applies today. I saw a very interesting tshuva from Rav Moshe Feinstein where he applies this teaching. Ramesha Feinstein in Igris Moshe Even Ezer Gimel Siman Yud Ches was asked about, it's called the double ring ceremony. We know that a woman, there's two sections of marriage. In order to marry a woman, you have to perform 2 acts, and that's called Erisin and Nisuin. That's Kedushin and Chuppah, which means the first part is more of a transaction of where you give her the ring, and through that action it creates Kedushin, and then afterwards you enter the Chuppah, you enter the canopy, you enter the Yichud room, whatever it is, and that creates Nisuin. So they asked Moshe, is it okay? Normally what happens, the man gives the woman a ring, with that she accepts and she allows herself to enter the form of Kedushin. That's the process. The man gives the ring to the woman, and he from a halachic perspective acquires her, and she gives herself over to him, whatever it is, and that's the concept of Kedushin. There's no area in halacha for the woman to give the man a ring, because it doesn't apply. It doesn't make any sense. The transaction is not working in both directions. It's working one way. It would not make sense for a woman to give a man a ring. But they asked Moshe Feinstein, in the non-Jewish circles, obviously we know that the man gives the woman a ring, the woman gives a man a ring as a sign of an oath, whatever they say they're doing. So they asked Moshe Feinstein, is that allowed? From a halachic perspective. Because the man is still giving the woman a ring, so it should still, this is just sort of, it's like adding something that's nonsensical, but who cares, so why can't you do it? So Rav Moshe says it's not allowed. And Rav Moshe says a very interesting reason to prohibit it. He says, I feel, that doing this is a very grave prohibition, because through this act, because eventually this can lead to people forgetting how Kedushin is performed. Right now, Kedushin is performed by a man giving a woman a ring. What's going to happen if everyone starts doing double ring ceremonies? 50 years from now, people might think that the only way to perform Kedushin is a man giving a woman a ring and a woman giving a man a ring. And therefore, what we've effectively done is we've caused an area of Torah to be forgotten. We've forgotten that halacha of how to perform Kedushin properly. And therefore, Moshe says it's not allowed, because he says it's under the prohibition of Kol Meshakech Davarech Mitamudu Avar B'Lav. This Gemara Menachos that says that you're not allowed to forget Torah. And by doing an act that will cause people to forget Torah is not allowed. So that was a little bit of an introduction. This whole discussion till now is about forgetting Torah. The next area that I want to talk about is doing things that Chazal say is bad for your memory. We're going to see there are many areas in Chazal, in Gemara, in Midrashim, where the Rabbanan teach that if you do this and this act, it's bad for your memory. I'll give you an example. We'll see that a man is not allowed to walk between 2 women. The Gemara says that if a man walks between 2 women, he'll forget his learning. It'll affect his memory. He'll start losing his memory faculties. So the question is, if you do these acts, and that's, by the way, the main part of this shir, we'll be talking about it. The question is, if you do those acts that Chazal say is bad for your memory, does that mean that you'll have transgressed the prohibition of forgetting Torah? Meaning the Torah says, we know that you're not allowed to forget a piece of your learning, you're not allowed to forget a Gemara, and if you don't review a Gemara and you forget it, it's a prohibition. So therefore one can argue that if I walk between 2 women, I've caused myself to forget to lose memory. In essence, I've forgotten my Torah, and that should be prohibited. So it's a question amongst the Mefarshim. So Ravad Yosef Zatzal in Yabia Omer Chelik Beis Yordei Siman Ches has a very lengthy discussion about all these topics, and he says that it appears that from the Sefer Hasidim that if you do things that the Gemara says is bad for your memory, it does not cause you to transgress the prohibition of forgetting your Torah. That's what he says. The forgetting your Torah is one thing, and then there's doing something that's bad for your memory. It's obviously a bad idea because it's bad for your memory. It's not a good thing, but it's not the prohibition of forgetting Torah. Rav Chaim Kanievsky Shlita, in his Sefer HaZikaron, which is a small sefer that he printed in the back of the Sefer Siach HaSadeh, Chelik Aleph, he also says this, that forgetting Torah is worse than doing things that the Gemara says is bad for your memory. And he says, why is this? He says, I don't understand. What's the difference? If I forget Gemara Brachos, it's a prohibition. I walk between two women, it's bad for my memory, which will make me forget Gemara Bracha. So what's the difference? Why is one prohibited and one is just not a good idea? So he says, Tzarech Lomar, what you have to say is, Kivan she'ein zeh muchach sheyishkach, el zeh gorem lahachash hazikaron. This is the answer is very simple. The Torah says you're not allowed to forget your learning. Therefore, if I have a Gemara Brachas Daf Beis, if I don't review it, I'm going to forget that Gemara. So if I don't review it, it's a prohibition because I forgot that Gemara. But when it comes to doing things that the Gemara says is bad for your memory, all it says is that it's bad for your memory. Who says it means that you're going to forget that piece of Gemara? Maybe you'll forget all the baseball games that you watched, and maybe you'll forget maybe it'll just cause you to not be able to remember as well. But it doesn't mean you'll forget your learning. And therefore, it's not a prohibition. Obviously, it's something that you should avoid. Anything that is bad for your memory is a terrible thing, but it's not the biblical prohibition. However, Ravad Yosef Zatzal brings down from the Kuntras Hisayrus B'Tshuva that he feels that it is a prohibition. He says that if you do things that the Gemara says is bad for your memory, it's a biblical prohibition. The Sefer Ruach Chaim in Ashmatas Levin Ezra Daf Kuf Samach Amidal also says this. This is also the opinion of Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld. I saw in the Sefer Tshuvas Van Hagas from Moshe Sternbuch in Chilik Aleph Seif Simin Gimel. He says that the Shulchan Aruch lists about 8 or 9 things that you have to wash your hands for: leaving the bathroom, walking through a cemetery, whatever it is. And the Gemara and the Shulchan Aruch says that if you do these acts, if you go to a cemetery, you don't wash your hands, it's bad for your memory. You'll forget your Torah. These things, again, it's another example of something that the Gemara says is bad for your memory. And he says that the Chazon Ish felt that if you do something that's bad for your memory, it's a biblical prohibition. By the way, that's noteworthy on his side because Rav Chaim Kanievsky usually quotes the Chazon Ish. So I find it interesting that he says that the Chazon Ish or Moshe Sternbuch feels that according to the Chazon Ish, it's a biblical prohibition to do things that are bad for your memory, when Rav Chaim Kanievsky disagrees, and usually Rav Chaim Kanievsky does not disagree with the Chazon Ish. Okay, I'll just a couple more things. The Sefer Shmiras Haguf Hanevesh Haguf by Rav Yitzchak Lerner Shlita in Perik Yud Ches of the introduction, he says that he heard from Rabbi Forst Shlita, who had heard from Moshe Feinstein, who was told by his father, that was told by the Aruch HaShulchan, about like 6 degrees, that the Aruch HaShulchan feels that if you do things that the Gemara says is bad for your memory, even though it's all Kabbalistic, walking between two women, the reason why it's bad for your memory, it's a Kabbalistic concept. Even though it's Kabbalistic, it's a prohibition, it falls under the biblical prohibition of forgetting your Torah. Now, the reason why this argument is so important is because we're going to talk about a lot of things that are bad for your memory, and the Gemara says not to do, or to do, it's good for your memory, bad for your memory. If something is just bad, okay, so maybe you could be lenient. But if something is biblically prohibited, of course you can't be lenient. So according to the Aruch HaShulchan, and according to Rav Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld, all the things that we're going to talk about today are biblical prohibitions. And therefore, anytime there's a doubt, or anytime you're unsure about, you have to be very machmer, because you're dealing with a biblical prohibition. Biblical prohibitions are not something to be taken very lightly. Before we actually begin the more details of the different items, I'll just want to mention one more thing, and that is, according to a lot of poskim, the Shmir Shalom, Siman Ayin Beis, Rav Chaim Kanievsky, this whole halacha of forgetting Torah only applies to an adult male who's a learned person. But an adult male who's not learned, who doesn't have Torah, unfortunately he doesn't have any Torah, then obviously there's no prohibition. There's no prohibition of doing things that the Gemara says is bad for your memory. Meaning, when the Gemara says doing, let's say, walking between two women is bad for your memory, that doesn't apply to someone who doesn't have Torah, obviously, and also it doesn't apply to women. Meaning, everything that we're about to talk about today does not apply to women, because women are not obligated to learn Torah. And if you're not obligated to learn Torah, then you're not going to be punished for forgetting Torah. Meaning, if a woman learns Torah, everything she does is extra credit. She doesn't have to learn Torah, and therefore anything that she forgets, or does something to forget, is not a problem, because she doesn't have to have it in the first place. Therefore, there's no prohibition. So everything we're going to talk about today of doing things that are bad for your memory, it does not apply to a woman or to a non-learned person. Okay, so let's begin. What I want to do is I'm going to take about 4 or 5 things that the Gemara says is bad for your memory, and because they're more common, I want to talk about them. So the first one I want to talk about is something that when I was in yeshiva, it was very common, people like to talk about. I want to explain exactly the halachas, and that is Harogel b'zeisim, one who is someone who eats a lot of olives. Harogel b'zeisim. The Gemara in Hurrius, Daf Yud Gimel, says that there are 5 things that are bad for your memory, and one of them is Harogel b'zeisim, someone who is commonly eating olives. That's what the Gemara says. The Gemara adds that eating olives can take away memory of 70 years, but eating olive oil can rectify that and bring back memory of 70 years. So eating olives is very bad for your memory, and it's called Harogel b'zeisim. That's what it's called. Someone who commonly eats olives is bad for your memory. The Marsha, interestingly enough, we know that there are 7 species. There are 7 species that you make a special bracha of alamichya. It's chamishas minei dagim, the chamishas aminim. Geffen, teina, rimon, pomegranate, and a fig, chita, saora, and there's a whole list of 7. Each one of them is the fruit itself, except for one, and that is olives. Zayis, the only time you make the bracha is by shemen zayis, which is the oil. If you eat the actual olive itself, that does not apply. The special bracha is only on the olive oil. So the Marsha asks, why is it that all the other fruits are special when they're their own fruit? The only fruit that's not special on its own, but it's more special when you have the juice that comes out of it, is the olive. Why is the olive oil more chashav than the olive itself? He says maybe it's because of this Gemara. The olive itself is a bad fruit, so to speak. It's bad for your memory. The fruit that's beneficial for your memory is the olive oil, and therefore olive oil is considered more chashav. Rabbeinu Bechai, ala Torah, this is obviously Kabbalistic, but I'll read you what he says. This is a Parshas Vayishlach, in the area of Atetze Dina. He says, Oid Yedua, it's known, Shekol ha'ilanos yesh lahen leiv kishetachton osan. Every tree has a heart. When you cut it down, it hurts. It's the heart of the tree. Aval ilan zayis, but the tree of the olive tree, ein lo leiv. It doesn't have a heart. I don't know what that means, but it has an area, it has a more tough. And therefore the nature of the olive is to cause people to forget Torah. It's a more rough natured fruit. That's what he says. This is brought down, by the way, the Magen Avram, Siman Kuf Ayin, Sifkat and Yutes, the Aruch HaShulchan, and the Kaf HaChaim, and the Ben Ish Chai. So this halacha is brought down by Sfaradim, Ashkenazim, everyone, that you're not allowed to eat olives. The problem is, everyone eats olives. You go to a pizza shop, you can get olives on your pizza. Everyone eats olives. So what's the hatter? How could everyone do something that, according to many poskim, is biblically prohibited? So I saw the Magen Avram already was bothered by this. Everyone was bothered by this. So the Magen Avram says that there are certain Kabbalistic incantations and thoughts that you could have when you eat the olives, and it'll make it good for you. Obviously, I'm not even going to try to begin to deal with that because I don't really know what the Kabbalistic stuff is. It's talking about different names of Hashem. I don't know, but that's not really helpful for us because we're not people who can do that. So I want to talk about some of the heterim possibly to allow people to eat olives. So first of all, Rechai Kanievsky Shlita, he says that the Gemara says it's only a problem if you're rogel b'zeisim. Not eating olives. You commonly eat olives. You're always eating olives. What does it mean always eating olives? Every meal? Every day? Every week? So Rechaim Kanievsky says he doesn't know. The Gemara doesn't say how often it's a problem to eat olives, meaning once in a while it's okay. Often is a problem. What does it mean often? So Rechaim Kanievsky says if you take the word rogel, there are different areas of Gemara in different areas of Shas. So Rechaim Kanievsky is a big Talmid Chacham. He knows all areas of Shas, and there are different areas of Shas where the word rogel is employed. And in most cases, it means once every 30 days. So therefore, says Rechaim, it's possible that so too over here, that it's only a problem if you eat olives once every 30 days. But if you've eaten olives once a year, that'll be okay. But again, that's still not the best heter in the world because a lot of people like to eat olives more common than once every 30 days. So what's the heter? So Rav Yaakov Emden was already bothered by this in the Sefer Maruk Tzia, Siman Kuf Ayin. Let me read you what Rav Yaakov Emden says. He asks, how come people do not refrain from eating olives? Everyone eats olives. Even though normally these are God-fearing Jews who normally would not do anything that's bad for your memory. So Nirali says Rechaim, it says Rav Yaakov Emden, it appears to me it's only a problem if your meal is on the olives and the olives are raw. But nowadays, where olives are pickled and brined or salted, and therefore they're not raw, and they're just a side dish, then it's mutter. So says Rav Yaakov Emden, the whole prohibition of eating olives only applies to olives that are raw, and they're the main focus of the meal. But if olives are cooked, or they're salted or brined, and they're on, as a side dish in hummus, on top of pizza, whatever it is, then it'll be okay. V'raya l'davar says, I'll prove it to you. She'ich shash b'zeisim kivushim. I'll prove it to you. Why? The Gemara says in Nivamis that Rav Yochanan was eating olives. So how could Rav Yochanan eat olives if it wasn't allowed? So says Rav Yaakov Emden, it must be that it was salted and it was raw. Okay. That's, I think, the major heter that people rely on. That teaching of Rav Yaakov Emden, that it only applies to olives that are raw, but not olives that are salted or cooked. Now, Rav Chaim Kanievsky does mention a very good point, and that is, first of all, from the Meiri that we said before, that the heart of the olive tree doesn't have a heart, so therefore it's by nature more of a rough fruit. So then it's hard to believe that there's much of a difference between cooked olives and raw olives. Okay, but more than that, the Gemara, Rav Chaim was a little bothered. That means the whole issue of the Gemara of eating olives is only raw. What's more common, to eat olives that are raw or to eat olives that are cooked? Eating olives that are cooked. I've never tried to eat olives raw. So it's very interesting that the Gemara says you're not allowed to eat olives like across the board, but it only means the rare occurrence of eating it raw. It's a little funny. But I think that's part of the heter. In addition, the opinion of Rav Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld and of Yisrael Volt's Shlita, the Zatzal, the Rav of Budapest, was that if you eat olives with olive oil, it's okay. Rav Chaim doesn't like this, Rav Chaim disagrees, but I think that's also part of the heter, is that if you're going to eat olives, if you eat it with olive oil, because olive oil is beneficial for your memory, the olive oil sort of negates the negative aspects of the olives itself. Okay. Let's go to the next one. I want to talk about the next one. The next one is sleeping on your clothes. The Gemara in Hariyas Daf Yud Gimel Mebei says that there are 5 things that are bad for your memory. And one of them is Hamaniach Kela of Tachas Mirashaisav. Rashi says that this means taking clothes and sleeping on it. A lot of times when people are camping, they'll take their shirt, they'll take their coat, they'll take something, I don't know, when they're in a plane, they're on a bus, they'll take their clothing, they'll ball it up and use it as a pillow. It says you're not allowed to do that. The Maril also says that it's not allowed. This is also the Sefer Leket Yosha Arachayim Daf Mem Hey also says that his Rebbe, the Baal Trumas Hadeshin, the great Trumas Hadeshin, was also makbid on this, and therefore this is something that's not allowed. Okay. Now the problem is, again, a lot of people do this, so what is the heter? So I think the answer to this is you have to focus on a Gemara in Tamid. The Gemara in Tamid Daf Chavhem Beis, all the Mefarshim deal with. And that is, the Gemara says, the Kahanim in the Beis HaMikdash, when they would get tired, they would take their clothes, ball it up, and sleep on it as a pillow. So all the Mefarshim ask, if this is not allowed, how could the Kahanim do it in the Beis HaMikdash? You'd think that if someone was going to be careful to do a halacha, to keep halacha properly, it would be the Kahanim in the Beis HaMikdash. So how could they do this? How could the Kahanim sleep on their clothes, use their clothes as their pillows? I thought that's not allowed. So Rav Avad Yosef and Rav Chaim answer very simple. It was a problem, but in the Beis HaMikdash, it was sort of like a protection. Like a school of the Beis HaMikdash, that if you do that in the Beis HaMikdash, you won't forget your memory. Okay, but that obviously won't apply to us, that won't help us, because we're not in the Beis HaMikdash. But I think the answer is really, you can answer very simply from the Mishnah Berurah. The Mishnah Berurah in Siman Beis, of Katan Beis, he writes from the Sefer Magen Giborim, that if you put something in between the clothes and your head, it's allowed. Meaning, if let's say you're sleeping on a jacket, the way to make it okay, the way you can make it allowed, is you take a pillowcase and put it in between. Or you take a bag and put it in between. Something in between the clothes and your head, that'll make it okay. So therefore, one can answer very simple. The Rush writes that when the Kohanim, when they would sleep, they would take their clothes, but they would put it in like a pillowcase. So therefore it's very simple. If they put it in a pillowcase, it's not a problem. So that's the first heter. The first heter for this halacha is if you're sleeping on your clothes, but if you put something in between your head and the clothing, it'll be allowed. Rav Yaakov Emden in his Siddur Hanagas Habayker Seder Levisha Eis Beis also writes this. He says Hamaneach Mabusha Mirashais of Kashal Shecha. It's bad for your memory to sleep on your clothing. But if there's something in between your head and the clothing, it's okay. Again, Rav Chaim Kanievsky doesn't like this, but I think that's one of the major heterim. So if you put something in between, it'll be okay. Rav Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld also says he feels that it's only a problem to sleep on your clothing. But if you're sleeping on other people's clothing, meaning clothing that does not belong to you, then it's okay. So technically, if you have two guys that are camping, they should swap a pillow. Like they want to take shirts and use as pillows, they should swap shirts. So each person should sleep on someone else's shirt. And therefore, Rav Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld says it's very simple. The Gemara in Tamura, the reason why the Kohanim were allowed to sleep on their clothing is because Kohanim didn't own that clothing. That clothing belonged to the Beis Hamikdash, and it's only a problem to sleep on your clothing. But to sleep on clothing that belongs to the other people or that doesn't belong to you, like the clothing of the Beis Hamikdash, will be allowed. Again, other poskim disagree with this, but I think that's also part of the heter. One more thing is Rav Chaim Kanievsky says that he feels that it's not a problem to rest on your arm. A lot of times people, when they want to take a nap, they'll put their hand down and they'll rest on their hand the way they do during Tachanun. So why isn't it a problem? I'm now sleeping on my sleeve. Says Rav Chaim, that's not a problem. Okay, so therefore the discussion, just to summarize, when it comes to eating olives, one of the heterim would be if it's cooked or if it's eaten salted and it's not the main dish, it's a side dish. Again, everyone disagrees, but I'm just trying to give the heterim. In addition, according to the Yisrael Volts, if you put olive oil, then it negates the negative properties of the olives. And when it comes to sleeping on your clothing, one of the heterim is the Mishnah Berurah says that if you put something in between the clothing and your head, it's okay. And in addition, according to the Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld, if you sleep on someone else's clothing or clothing that doesn't belong to you, then it's also permissible. The next thing I want to talk about is the halacha of a man not walking between two women. The Gemara in Hariyah says there are 10 things that are bad for your memory. And one of them is a man is not allowed to walk between two women. The Gemara in Pesachim adds that a woman is also not allowed to walk between two men. So therefore we have a very, very interesting issue that's very difficult to deal with. And that is, you're not allowed to walk between a man is not allowed to walk between two women, and a woman is not allowed to walk between two men. Because this is bad for the memory. So I just want to make one quick point. A woman is not allowed to walk between two men. I think that means because it's bad for the memory of the men. As we saw before, according to most Mefarshim, there's no issue of a woman doing things that's bad for the memory because women are not obligated to learn Torah. Therefore, when it says over here that a woman is not allowed to walk between two men, I assume what it means is that by doing so, she's hurting the memory of the men. Either case, it doesn't matter, because either way she's not allowed to. So a woman is not allowed to walk between two men, and a man is not allowed to walk between two women. So that's tough. That's a big deal. Anytime you're walking in public, it's very, very hard to be careful about this halacha. So what do we do? So in the Sefer HaZikaron, he writes that the Chazon Ish was very, very, very particular not to walk between two women. He was very, very careful with this halacha. And in the Sefer Time of the Kra is a Sefer on Rav Chaim Kanievsky on Chumash. In the back of the Sefer, he writes different customs of the Chazon Ish that he heard from his mother. Rav Chaim Kanievsky Shlita's mother was the sister of the Chazon Ish. So therefore he has a lot of things that he heard from his mother, meaning what her brother, the Chazon Ish, did. And it says in Ois Chavtes the following. Hikpid ma'oi, the Chazon Ish was very, very careful. Shelo yavru bein beis nashim, that a man should not walk between two women. V'she'ish lo yitaver bein beis nashim, and a woman would not walk between two men. Ula'acha she'amar shekashel alizar, and a woman once told, a woman once told the Chazon Ish she doesn't know what to do. It's so hard to keep this halacha. And Amar Allah, he said, it's a little harsh. He said to her, would you walk into fire? Meaning, I know it's hard, but the Judaism is not always easy. That's what you got to do. So therefore, the Chazon Ish was very, very meticulous, very, very careful in this halacha. So what are certain heterim? So let's talk about some of the heterim. Rav Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld in Shuvah Siman Tavkuf Gimel writes, Kinira, it appears to me shadafka sheyelech bein beis nashim she'oimdus. It's only a problem if you're passing between two women, meaning they're stationary and you're walking. Or you're stationary and they're walking past you. Someone has to be stationary for it to be a problem of passing through each other. But let's say you're walking on the street, you're walking in the city, and women are walking past you, they're walking and you're walking. You happen to be walking in between them. They're walking and you're walking, no one's stationary. So says Rav Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld, that's not a problem, because that's not called passing through them. That's walking alongside them. That's very different. Also, the Ben Ish Chai in Shana Beis, Parshas Pinchas Eisyid Zayin, writes that first of all, if there's another man, meaning if it's two men are allowed to walk between two women, and in addition, it's only a problem if the women are within Daled Amos of each other. Meaning, a man is not allowed to walk between two women if they're within 8 feet of each other. But if there's one woman on one side of the street and another woman on the other side of the street, then it's not a problem. Rav Chaim Kanievsky Shlita adds a very big heter, and that is, when it comes to a katana, a woman below the age of 12, under bat mitzvah, it's not a problem. Meaning, if there are a lot of little girls standing, you could walk in between two little girls under the age of bat mitzvah. It's not a problem. Why? Because the Gemara says, Isha, it says a woman, you're not allowed to walk between two women, in Noshim. Before the age of 12, they're not Noshim, they're girls. They're katanas. This is also the opinion of Rav Nisan Karelach Shlita and the Sefer Chutshani of Enes Daf Samach Tes. So, he brings down also, Rav Chaim Gribla also brings us down, Zatzal and Chil Gimel Sim Tav Kuf Chav Hey from the Alter Mikelm. Now, I want to explain, I think the Alter Mikelm, to check it up, but I want to explain the reason for this is that all these things that we've been listing till now, it's all Kabbalistic. It's not like there's much rationale for not walking between two women. According to most poskim, this is all Kabbalistic. So therefore, there's a rule amongst the Mefarshim that when you're dealing with things that are Kabbalistic, that we don't understand the reason for, then you can't be medama. If you can't rationalize it, then you can't apply it to cases that were not listed in the Gemara. Therefore, you have to be very, very specific to exactly what the Gemara says, because we don't know the reason behind it. Therefore, when the Gemara says you're not allowed to walk between two women, it means women who are adults over the age of 12. Under the age of 12, they're no longer women, and therefore the Gemara did not specifically say that that's a problem. Even though you might argue, well, if it's a problem for the over the age of 12, wouldn't it be a problem for the under the age of 12? The answer is, how could you apply when you don't understand the reasons behind it? If I go over to a doctor and I say, I took this pill and it made me feel better, maybe I should take another pill and it'll also make me feel better. He says, yeah, but you don't know the properties of the pill and you don't know why it worked, and therefore how do you assume it would apply to another pill? It's exactly 100%, and you wouldn't be able to compare. So to over here, when you're dealing with things that are Kabbalistic and we don't understand the reasons behind it, you can't compare the two. You can't apply it to other cases. It has to be exactly the way that the Gemara says it. And the Gemara said that it's only a problem for walking between two adult women. Walking between two girls would not be a problem. The Marsham in Madur Dalet, Chelik Dalet, Simikuf Memches also wonders whether it's a problem to walk between two non-Jewish women. Again, it's a similar notion. The Gemara says you're not allowed to walk between two women. Maybe the Gemara was only talking about Jewish women. Non-Jewish women would be okay. So if you had a ball game and you're walking between two women, two non-Jewish women, maybe it'd be okay. However, the Sefer Oitzi Yad HaChaim in Siman Tuf Reish Lamed Daled, he says that from the Zohar HaKadosh it appears that there's no difference. Ein chilik bein Nashei Yisrael bein Nashei Akam. According to the Zohar HaKadosh, there makes no difference between whether it's Jewish or non-Jewish women. In both cases, it's a problem. I saw that Rav Ephraim Greenblatt Zatzal has a very interesting shaila. And that shaila is, are you allowed to walk between two family members? Specifically, he was dealing with Yemenite Jews. We know that Rabbi Gershon, one of the great Gaonim, he made a proclamation, a ban, Cherem Rabbi Gershon. He banned certain things, and one of the things that he banned was polygamy. A man is now allowed to have two wives. According to Halacha, technically, a Jewish man is allowed to have two wives. A woman is not allowed to have two husbands, but a man is allowed to have two wives. And the reason why it's so taboo nowadays is because Rabbeinu Gershom got up and he said it's not allowed anymore. It was one of the Cherem Rabbeinu Gershom, and we're very, very meticulous for this. However, there were certain areas, especially amongst the Sfardim, where this custom was never accepted. I think amongst some areas of the Yemenite Jews it was never accepted. Again, nowadays I can't imagine anyone does it, but there was such a concept. So the question is, if you have someone who has two wives, meaning he was part of the community that allowed polygamy, and he has two wives, is it a problem for him to walk between two wives? So It's unclear because, again, you're dealing with Kabbalistic, so it's not like something you could rationalize. Well, maybe it makes a difference between it's your wife and someone else or other women. So I saw that Rechaim Kanievsky on the Sefer Shmiras Haguf HaNefesh, he writes his comments. And on the bottom, he writes the following: Marana Chazanish, the Chazanish Zatzal Omer, Shagam Ishtoi Bechlal Mashamur Chazal Shalayaver Ben Shtei Noshim. That the Chazanish felt that it's a problem to walk between two family members as well. Meaning a man is not allowed to walk between two women, even if it's his daughters. It's also a problem. Okay. So I want to say one major heter, and this is something that I'm very makbid on. If anyone ever sees me at a wedding or an area where there's a lot of people, I try to be careful as best that I can in this halacha. What happens if you need to walk between two women? You're at a wedding. What could you do? How could you avoid it? So the Sefer Lev Eliyahu, they bring down from, I think it's Rav Eliyahu Lopyan. The Rav Eliyahu Lopyan says that Misha Mochach La'aver bin Shtei Nashim, if you have to walk between two women, it's gonna happen. Then you should carry a stick in your hand. Carry something in your hand. Holding something in your hand protects you. Again, it's all Kabbalistic. I don't understand, but that's what they say. Now again, the Chazanish was not so confident in this heter, but this is definitely something that a lot of people are makbid on, that if you're going to walk between two women, you should hold on to something. And I saw that they say that if you don't have anything to hold on to your payas. I try to hold on to my tzitzis. It's one of the added benefits of having your tzitzis out, is that you hold on to your tzitzis. That's what you should do. Okay. That's when it comes to walking between two women. One more halacha. We'll do a couple more. I think it was about 15 minutes left. We'll do a couple more. One is the Gemara in Hariyas Daf Yud Gimel Mebei says that you're not allowed to stare. Hamastakel b'fnei hames. You're not allowed to stare at the face of a dead body. It's brought down by the Mishnah Berurah also. The Sefer Chupas Eliyahu Rabbah Shar Gimel says that if you stare at the dead body, the face of a dead body, in addition to having the prohibition of forgetting Torah, it also causes you to lose your eyesight. Unfortunately, a lot of people, also by the way, in addition to all this, it's also not good for your soul. It's not good for your neshama, but it makes you a little more, a little less sensitive to death. A lot of times people, for some reason, on YouTube and on videos, they like to show these very morbid and videos of death, and it's really not supposed to be, it's really not allowed. You really shouldn't be looking at these things, because in addition to the fact that it makes you forget your Torah, in addition from the fact that it makes your eyes weaker, it's also not good for your soul. Ramesha Feinstein writes in a tshuva that you shouldn't kill bugs with your hands, because every time you kill a bug with your hands, every time you swat a mosquito, it makes you desensitive, a little less sensitive to death. A little bit less. So it's the same thing over here. In addition to what we're talking about right now, it's not good to see these videos. You should really look. Now, you shouldn't be on the websites anyway. But if you're gonna, don't look at these videos. For some reason, people like to show it: Arabs killing each other, Jews killing Arabs, all these things. It's not good. It's not good for your soul. It doesn't help anyone. But the Gemara does say, but it says it's a problem to stare at the face of a dead body. So there's an issue. The issue is the Gemara Ma'ikatan. The Gemara Ma'ikatan Daf Chav Zayin Amud Aleph says that originally they had open casket funerals. That's what they used to have. And they used to have the open casket funerals. And the Ran explains the reason why they had open casket funerals is Kedei Laharbeis Bebechi. It added emotion to the funeral if you got to see the face. And they used to say at the funeral, look at this deceased person. He was so beautiful when he was alive, and now what happened to him? Meaning everyone has to do tshuva because life's fleeting. It doesn't last very long. Look at this person. He was alive yesterday and he's not alive anymore. The Gemara, by the way, adds that they stopped doing it because certain people, especially people that were poor, their faces got distorted due to hunger, and it wasn't respectful to have open casket funerals if not everyone is able to look nice enough to have an open casket funeral. Okay, but the issue is, how could you have an open casket funeral? I thought you're not allowed to stare at the face of a dead body. So the poskim deal with this. The Netziv writes that it's only a problem with histakel, to stare, but to see it fleeting, it's okay. So maybe, he says in the Netziv, at these open casket funerals, they wouldn't stare at the face of a dead body, they would just look at it and pass by, like quickly look and move on. So according to the Netziv, if let's say, I don't know what situation you're in, but you're in a place where you see the face of a dead body, you shouldn't stare at it. By the way, the Poskim, there's a sefer, he questions whether this applies to pictures, but you have to be machmir because we don't know. Maybe it applies to pictures as well. So therefore, according to the Nesiv, it's okay to look, but not to look for a long time, not to linger, just a quick glance. So I saw my brother, Mordechai Yosef Shlita, and his new sefer came out on my cotton Meimayid. It's a good sefer. If anyone wants to purchase it, I think it's on. You can email him at yamatfila@gmail.com. It's a chashuv sefer on my cotton, which is my cotton's coming up soon. I think it's. You can contact me, avizakutinsky@gmail.com, avizakutinsky@gmail.com. I can get you a copy. So it's a chashuv sefer. So in that sefer, he's bothered by this question. He quotes the Netziv, and then he adds another answer, which I think is very good. That we said before that these halachas of forgetting Torah doesn't apply to women. So maybe the whole concept of open casket funerals is only for the women. The men wouldn't be close enough wouldn't be privy to this. It was only applied to women. Okay, fine. The next halacha I want to talk about is reading a tombstone. Reading a tombstone. The Gemara in Hurriya says you're not allowed to read a tombstone. If you read the words on a tombstone, it's bad for your memory. So the Sefer Nogdu Mitzvah writes from the Arizal. The Arizal obviously knows everything about these concepts. The Arizal said that it's only a problem if the letters are sticking out, but if the letters are sunken, it's not a problem. So that's why, by the way, if you know, it's brought by the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, also in Siman Kuf Chav Chesef Yigimel. That's why you'll notice most big Rabbanim, when you go to their graves, their tombstones, the words are engraved in. They're not sticking out. It's very rare for a big Rav to have the letters sticking out. And I think the reason is, you go to Rav Adi Yosef, you go to all these Gedolim, it's all sunken in. I think the reason is to be careful about this halacha. Because according to the Arizal, it's only a problem to read the tombstone if the letters are sticking out. And we all know that when you go to a big rabbi's grave, you read the tombstone. That's just what people do. So therefore what they do is they have the words sunken in and not the words sticking out. I saw this Sefer Yosef Aimitz writes an unbelievable thing. We know that a lot of people, they take rocks and they put it on the grave. It's unclear exactly why people do this. But the Yosef Aimitz Pashtus, the Ber Hativ writes, the reason is just to, it's for the dead body. It's like putting flowers at the grave. It's like people were here. It makes him feel better that knowing that people visited him. But the Yosef Aimitz says that he heard that some people do this because they feel that this negates the negative properties of reading the tombstone. Meaning if you have words that are sunken, sticking out, and reading it is bad for the memory, some say that if you take a rock and you put it on it, it takes away the negative aspects, the negative qualities. Okay. Again, I don't know if that's true, but maybe it's definitely something to be avoided. So when you go to a grave, and you pass by a cemetery, you shouldn't read the words of a tombstone, especially if the words are sticking out. Rav Kiva Eger says in Yeridei Simshin Ayin Vav Sif Dalid that he brings out from the Arizal that if you did read it, so how do you fix it? Meaning you got to fix it. Right now you did something that's bad for your memory. What should you do? You should say the tefillah of Ahava Rabbah, which is the second bracha of Birchas Kriya Shema, until the words Uliyachecha Ba'ahava. If you say those words right away, it's good for your memory. It'll undo what you did, negative things that you did by reading the tombstone. One more thing. We'll do two more. 3 more actually. I'll try to do it quick. So the Magen Avraham writes in the name of the Arizal that you should be very careful not to wear two clothes at the same time, because it's bad for your memory. This can be very common, I think, when people take their yarmulkes, put it in their baseball caps or in their hats, and they put it on. You're putting two articles of clothing on at the same time, and it's not good for your memory. There's discussion amongst the poskim, are you allowed to wear a hat, the black hat, sometimes they'll put like rain bonnets, like plastic bonnets on it. Is it a problem, or is that considered one item of clothing, or is it two? You have to ask a Rav. You have to look into it. The poskim also talk about whether it applies to shoes. Fine. I'll just say this. Rosh Shlomo Zalman Auerbach Zatzal felt that it does not apply. Again, we said before, this is all Kabbalistic, so therefore you can't apply it to other cases. Therefore, Rosh Shlomo Zalman felt this whole halacha of not wearing two items of clothing at the same time, not putting it on, says Rosh Shlomo Zalman Auerbach that only applies to putting on the clothing at the same time, but taking it off. A lot of times after you want to take a shower, you take off your shirt and your tzitzis at the same time. That's not a problem. It's only applying to putting on two articles of clothing at the same time, not taking off. However, the great Mekubal, Rav Yitzchak Safran, the Kemarner Rebbe, in a Sefer Shulchan Atar, he says, Yizahar milubah shnei babushim yachad, a person should be careful not to wear two clothing at the same time. Ki kashal shich, it's not good for your memory. and it also causes negative klipus. And you should also not take off two clothing at the same time. So I think it's something that's best to be avoided. The next thing, two more things I want to talk about. The next thing is drying your clothing. The Tashbeitz writes in Siman Reish Pei Zayin, Eino menagev yada bechaluka, you should not dry your hands on your shirt. So I think that's very, very important. It's brought down by the Magen Avraham in the Mishabura Sifkat and Memhei. I think it's very important when you go out of the bathroom. A lot of times people will dry their hands on their clothing. It's something you should avoid. The Paiskim are unsure, does this apply if the clothing is not on you, or let's say it's hanging, whatever it is, but it's something you should definitely avoid, especially according to some Paiskim, it's a Doraisa, it definitely should be avoided. Okay. The last one I want to talk about is the Shach. The Shach in Yeridei Siman Reish Ayin Zayin writes that it's those who know Kabbalistic concepts know that when you should not leave a sefer open when you leave the room, and if you do, it'll cause you to forget what you learned. And he says that there's a special malach whose name is Shade, Shin Dalid, which stands for Shomer Dafin, which stands for he watches the pages. There's a special angel who watches the pages, and the second you leave the room, he attacks you and makes you forget what you learned. So, this is something that we should be very careful with. When you leave the room, you have to close the siddur, you have to close the chumash, you have to close the gemara. If you're stepping out of the room, you should be careful to do this. The Aruch HaShulchan writes over there, Sif Beis, that it only applies if you leave the room for a long time, like you're going to the street. But if you're going outside just to use the bathroom, to make a phone call, it's okay. You can leave the sefer open. However, in the Sefer Shmiras Hakuf HaNefesh, Daf Reish Ayin Daled, he brings down from the Shalom Meshiv. He brings out in the Shalom Meshiv also agrees to this. However, the Kaf HaChaim disagrees, and he says that even if you're leaving the room for one moment, you have to close the sefer. And the Yaskel Avdi, Ravadi Hadaya, in Chelik Hey Yordei Simin Nun Vav, a big posik, he says also it's a problem. It's a problem to leave the sefer open even for a moment, to leave the room. And he says, think about it, you have an angel who's ready, who wants to do his job. His job is to make you forget your Torah. So the second you leave the room, he's going to attack you, because angels want to do their job as best as they can, and therefore you shouldn't leave the room even for a moment without closing the sefer. One more thing before we stop. I want two things. First of all, I mentioned before you're not supposed to stare at the face of a dead body. They bring down from the Tamiyam and Hagim that staring at the face of a tzaddik is good for your memory. So it's the opposite. Alright, I want to end with this thought. Till now we've been talking about the negative qualities of forgetting Torah. I want to say this, that Rav Nachman of Breslov in Lekutei Eitzos, Zicharon Ois Tes writes, this is more of a hashkafa than halacha. He says, even though you have to be very careful to remember your Torah, but sometimes forgetting is a good thing. Sometimes the Hashem created the concept of forgetfulness for a reason, and it's a good thing sometimes. When if you're getting your Torah, it's bad. However, because sometimes you have to forget your sins. Because what it'll stop people when you want to go learn and you want to go daven, and you have your Yetzer Hara saying, how could you daven? Look what you did last night, look what you did yesterday. And those things are trying to stop you if you have to forget. Till now we've been talking about the negative qualities of forgetfulness, but there is sometimes a good aspect of forgetting. These thoughts just ruin your concentration, they ruin your thought process. How could you daven? You're the same person that did this. How could you do this? How could you daven when your mouth said this avera? How could you look at Torah when your eyes saw this avera? Says Renachon of Breslau, the second you did the avera, that's it. You have to forget. You have to move on. Forget about it. Move on. Don't start thinking about it. Move on. Therefore, that's when forgetfulness is amazing. That's when it's a good quality. Okay. All questions could be sent to Avi